And of course, we have this election that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, the U.S. election, no controversy there whatsoever. No issues. It seemed to have gone pretty smoothly. Be that as it may, we've got results, and we've got a lot to talk about that is going to really affect the tech world, both at a high, vague macroeconomic level, as well as some very tactical areas that are going to affect the CIO office and IT organizations all around the country. So there's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah, I am actually very pleased insofar as I think many of us were bracing for a contested election that was going to be dragged out for days, if not weeks, and that didn't happen, for good or for bad, depending on which side of the aisle you were on. But at least it was resolved. I mean, that was, one of the things that I was very, very concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'll just kind of lay my cards out in line. I was a little surprised by the outcome, particularly with, like I said, as strong of an outcome, I guess, as it was. But as it relates to enterprise tech, I think you know, the consensus right now is a couple of things. I think the incoming Trump administration is expected to be, more business friendly, and overall that is at the macro level, like you said, that should be a good thing for tech industry in general. I think the difficult part, as we'll dive into the specific elements around it, I think that the difficult part overall is going to be that while I'm glad that we didn't have a lot of ambiguity around the election itself, I think the Trump administration is going to introduce a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty, at least for the short period, for the probably the next 12 to 18 months, because he's very hard to predict. And so it's really difficult, and he's not consistent insofar as you can say, well, this is the lane he's going to go down. And so I think, even with everything we're talking about today, and I mean, I pulled from articles from sort of across the spectrum, and it's like throwing darts. I mean, there's some consistency, we'll talk about some of the things that I think there seems to be a general consensus around impact on tech industry, but for the most part, it's like, who knows? And that's going to be the difficult part if you're a CIO or if you're a tech company leader. Trying to navigate this is, I think, going to be challenging because we just don't really know which way the winds, so to speak, will be blowing.
Right. And I'm going to lay my cards on the table as well. My personal politics are usually pretty liberal. I've actually worked with state Democratic departments and conventions in the past. Obviously, my personal politics is on one side of the table. That said, Trump is very difficult to read on some of the issues that he does not campaign on a day-to-day basis. And technology is definitely one of those where he honestly did not talk very much about AI or tech. He did talk a little about crypto, which we'll get into a bit later. But I think it's hard to tell what he's going to do at a high level simply because this was not an important area to him. Now, he did have some funders, obviously, like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, who are extremely important in the tech world, Mark Andreessen, people who are literally shaping tech. And I think that will be an important thing to consider, which we'll also get into. And, there are some strengths, some weaknesses, and some really interesting nuances that we're going to get into based on what happened there.
I think I think it's interesting you say that, for two reasons. One is it wasn't just Trump. I mean, Kamala Harris' campaign also was pretty silent on most of the impact around the technology industry
Mm-hmm.
and what have you, which I find shocking given how important technology is to the industry, both in terms of
And
its
to
impact on
California.
society, specifically to California, impact on society overall, but impact just from an industry perspective on our contribution to GDP and all of those different elements. How it was just not a tabletop issue that either campaign was really discussing, and it's doubly interesting in that for maybe the first time we had some pretty significant tech heavyweights weigh in very heavily on this campaign, which again, the tech industry tends to play both sides of the coin, tends to try to be pretty agnostic and not dive into it. And this was an exception this time in Trump's favor in this case. And that was also interesting. So it's sort of doubly fascinating that there was so little conversation about the tech industry overall in this campaign. But